Imagine writing the most celebrated book of your generation. You are feted at dinner parties, your lines quoted in the forum, your name known from Spain to Syria. Then one morning an imperial decree arrives. You have 48 hours to leave Rome. You will never return. No trial, no formal charge that history fully records. Just a word, the Latin word carmen, meaning poem, and the slow death of exile on the shore of the Black Sea. This is what happened to Publius Ovidius Naso in the year 8 AD, and the book that helped destroy him is still in print today. To understand what happened to Ovid, you first have to understand the world he was born into, because it was a world in the middle of a very expensive identity crisis. Ovid was born in 43 BC, the year after Julius Caesar was assassinated. Rome had spent the previous century tearing itself apart. Civil war after civil war. Proscription lists. Imagine a government-published register of people it had decided to murder. The Republic, that great experiment in shared power, was functionally dead. By the time Ovid came of age, a single man had consolidated control over the entire Mediterranean world. His name was Gaius Octavius, and history knows him as Augustus, the first Roman emperor, though he was careful never to use that word publicly. He called himself first citizen. The distinction mattered enormously to him. Augustus had a project. Having won the wars, he now needed to win the peace, and winning the peace in his mind meant restoring something he called the mos maiorum, the customs of the ancestors, traditional Roman virtue, piety, duty, the sanctity of marriage, the dignity of the family. He passed legislation making adultery a criminal offense. He promoted religious observance. He commissioned poets, most famously Virgil, to write epic verse about Rome's divine destiny. It was, in the language of modern politics, a values agenda, and into this very carefully managed cultural moment, Ovid arrived like someone who had not read the memo. Ovid was from a good equestrian family, the Roman equivalent of minor gentry, and his father had plans for him: law, administration, a respectable career in public service. Ovid tried. He held a few minor legal posts, and then he quit. He later wrote, with characteristic breeziness, that he couldn't help himself. Every time he sat down to write a formal speech, what came out was verse. He had, as he put it, a mouth that spontaneously scanned into meter. What he wrote in his 20s was the Amores, love elegies, witty and unabashedly erotic, addressed to a woman he called Coroner. Whether Coroner was real or invented is a question scholars have argued about for centuries and will likely argue about forever. What isn't disputed is that the poems were a sensation. Roman love poetry was not a new genre. Catullus had done it a generation earlier. Tibullus and Propertius were doing it at the same time, but Ovid brought something different, an almost comedic self-awareness, a sense that he knew exactly how ridiculous desire made a person and found it delightful rather than tragic. Where other elegists wept, Ovid winked. He followed the Amores with the heroids, imagined letters from mythological heroines to the men who had abandoned them, Penelope writing to the absent Odysseus, Dido writing to Aeneas as his fleet disappears over the horizon. These were technically exercises, riffs on the literary tradition, but they were also quietly radical. They gave interior lives to women who, in the original myths, existed mainly as scenery. By his mid-30s, Ovid was the most famous living poet in Rome. He was wealthy, well-connected, twice divorced, about to be married for a third time to a woman he apparently adored. Life was good, and then he decided to write the book. The Ars Amatoria, The Art of Love, was published somewhere around 1 BC, give or take a year or two. It is, on its surface, a 3-book instructional poem on how to find, seduce, and keep a lover. Book 1, Where to Find Women in Rome, the theater, the races, the porticos, the temples. Book 2, How to Keep Her Interested Once You Have Her Attention. Book 3, The Same Advice Addressed to Women. Is funny, genuinely laugh-out-loud funny, a quality that often gets lost in translation, but survives in the best versions. Ovid advises his reader, with a perfectly straight face, that pretending to be drunk is an excellent romantic strategy, provided you are not so convincing that you actually fall over. He notes that tears, deployed correctly, are more effective than arguments. He recommends arriving at the races slightly late, and then engineering a reason to brush dust off her dress. It reads in places like a Roman self-help manual crossed with a comic novel. The irony is that Ovid himself knew exactly what he was doing. He writes in the third book, and this detail will matter, that his advice is not intended for respectable Roman matrons or the wives of citizens. He insists, writing for a specific category of woman, the kind who operates outside the protected legal sphere of Roman marriage. This disclaimer was, legally speaking, supposed to protect him. He had, as it were, put a terms and conditions notice on his love manual. Augustus was not impressed by the terms and conditions. In the year 8 AD, something happened. We do not know exactly what. This is one of the genuine mysteries of ancient history, and it is important to say that clearly. What we know is the result. Augustus issued a decree, not a formal legal judgment, but an imperial act called a relegatio, banishing Ovid to a town called Tomis. Tomis was on the western shore of the Black Sea, in what is now Romania. It was, by Roman standards, the end of the world. Cold, windswept, perpetually threatened by raids from Getic and Sarmatian tribes. The nearest major city was hundreds of miles away. There was no literary culture. There was no one, Ovid would later write with unconcealed despair, who spoke Latin. In his own account of the Exile, written from Tomis, in poem after poem over the final decade of his life, Ovid says he was punished for two things, a poem and a mistake. The poem was the Ars Amatoria. The mistake he never specifies precisely, using only the word error, an error, not a crime, he insists. Some kind of folly that he blames on his own eyes. He saw something he should not have seen. Centuries of scholars have tried to reconstruct the error. The most discussed theory, and it is only a theory, worth calling what it is, involves a scandal in the imperial family. In the very same year of Ovid's exile, Augustus banished his own granddaughter Julia for adultery. Some scholars have suggested Ovid's mysterious error connected him somehow to that affair, that he witnessed something, failed to report something, or was present at the wrong moment in the wrong house. Others think the whole thing was simply political. Augustus wanted a scapegoat for the moral failures of his reforms, and Ovid, who had spent 30 years cheerfully undermining the emperor's values agenda in verse, was the obvious candidate. We cannot know for certain. The ancient sources are frustratingly partial. What we can say is that no trial appears to have occurred. No defense was permitted. The decree went out, and Ovid had days to say goodbye to his wife, his friends, his city, and the life he had built. Here is where the story turns into something almost unbearable to read, if you let yourself. Ovid did not stop writing. In Tomis, shivering through winters that genuinely shocked him, Rome is a Mediterranean city. Tomis could freeze solid. He produced two collections of poems that are, in their way, as remarkable as anything he wrote in the sunshine of his career. The Tristia, or Sorrows, and the Epistulae ex Ponto, Letters from the Black Sea. These are not great art in the way his earlier work is great art. Ovid himself acknowledges this, with the kind of self-deprecating honesty that makes him such a peculiarly modern figure. He writes that he knows the poems are repetitive, self-pitying, probably bad. He is writing them not because he wants to, but because writing is the only thing keeping him sane. Every poem is a letter home. Every poem is another attempt to change the emperor's mind. He flatters Augustus shamelessly at a length that is uncomfortable to read. He lists his achievements, his loyalty, his harmlessness. He begs his wife to petition on his behalf. He asks his friends, who one by one went quiet, as friends of the disgraced tend to speak for him at court. He notes with the dark precision of a man who has thought of almost nothing else, that the Ars Amatoria was published a decade before his exile, and that Augustus himself had apparently not objected to it for 10 years. Why now? He never gets an answer. Augustus died in 14 AD. Ovid immediately began writing poems to the new emperor, Tiberius. These are, if anything, even more desperate. He is in his late 50s now. He has been in Tomis for 6 years. He has learned enough of the local Getic language to write a poem in it, a poem praising Augustus, which he apparently performed to the locals, who were presumably mystified but polite. Tiberius did not recall him. Ovid died in Tomis, probably in 17 or 18 AD, 10 years into his exile. He never saw Rome again. We have been talking about the book that got Ovid exiled, but there is another book, arguably the most important poem in Latin literature, full stop, and it has its own remarkable survival story. The Metamorphoses, 15 books of continuous epic verse, telling story after story from classical mythology, all linked by a single theme, transformation, bodies changing shape, gods becoming animals, humans becoming trees, rivers, constellations. It begins with the creation of the universe and ends, boldly, astonishingly, with the recent assassination of Julius Caesar, whose soul, Ovid tells us, transformed into a comet. Ovid had been working on it for years before the Exile. When the decree came, in those 48 hours of chaos and grief, he apparently threw the manuscript into the fire. He later wrote about this. He says he burned it because he hated it, because it was unfinished, because he couldn't bear it to outlast him in its imperfect state. It survived anyway. Copies already existed. Friends had them. Booksellers had them. You cannot unpublish a poem in Rome once it has been copied and distributed, a fact that offers a certain grim satisfaction. The Metamorphoses went on to become one of the most influential texts in Western history. Dante read it. Chaucer read it and plundered it shamelessly. Shakespeare drew from it constantly. The story of Pyramus and Thisbe, which he turned into both a Romeo and Juliet and a comic subplot in A Midsummer Night's Dream, comes directly from the Metamorphoses. Titian painted scenes from it. Bernini sculpted them. Milton, Spenser, Keats, Tennyson. The line of influence is so long and so direct that it is almost impossible to imagine English literature without this one Roman poem that its author tried to incinerate on the night his world ended. So where did the money go? Well, there was no money, not in the way this channel usually follows a trail. What was taken from Ovid was something harder to price. His home, his time, his right to answer the charges against him, and in the end, whatever years he had left. But here is the accounting that history actually ran. Augustus's moral reform program, the thing Ovid's existence had mocked, and his banishment was meant to enforce, it failed. The Roman aristocracy continued to pursue the kind of lives Ovid had described in verse, with or without his advice. The adultery laws were never seriously enforced against anyone who mattered. The mos maiorum remained an aspiration, not a reality. Augustus himself, according to the biographer Suetonius, was not above criticism in his private life. Ovid's books, meanwhile, survived everything. The exiled poet, writing in misery from the edge of the world, outlasted his emperor by 2 millennia. There is a modern itch that Ovid scratches, and it is not, or not only, the obvious one about love and seduction. It is something sharper. He is the great poet of irreversibility. The Metamorphoses is, when you read it carefully, a long meditation on the fact that things change and you cannot change them back. Bodies transform, time moves, the world you knew becomes unrecognizable. And yet the human thing inside, the consciousness that remembers, that grieves, that makes little jokes to keep despair at bay, that persists. The letters from Tomis are the most direct expression of this. They are the work of a man who knows he has lost, who cannot stop thinking about what he lost, and who keeps writing anyway, because what else do you do with a mouth that spontaneously scans into meter? The Metamorphoses is freely available, the public domain has it, and several translations are excellent. The Tristia is less read and more rewarding than its reputation suggests. If you have ever felt punished for something you didn't quite do, or exiled from a life you thought you had secured, and most of us have, in some version, you will find something uncomfortably familiar in those cold, repetitive, brilliant poems from the Black Sea. Ovid never got to choose his ending. His books got to choose it for him. That is either a consolation or a cruelty, depending on your mood. I'll leave you with this. If you had been one of Ovid's friends in Rome, the ones who went quiet, who stopped writing back, what do you think you actually would have done?